So why has my fuel consumption suddenly got worse? We got emailed from one of our viewers, Tim, and he had experienced a doubling of the fuel consumption on his car. So he was just interested as to the typical causes for that. So this video really is an answer to that question. It's going to help us to look at the problem of increased fuel consumption. And just as you would go to the doctor if you've noticed some weird things happening with your body and he will ask you about your symptoms, the fact that your car is using more fuel is often a symptom of a major problem, a major looming problem. And if you can catch it early enough, you'll avoid having to pay out for an expensive repair. So it's a really good idea to keep track of your fuel consumption, and you'll form a baseline. If you do mainly urban driving or mainly highway driving, you'll form a pattern. And if you notice anything out of the norm, that can indicate there is a problem with the car. So the problems with higher fuel consumption generally fall into two categories. We're going to focus really on the mechanical problems in this video, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. I've done other videos that cover most of these mechanical items in more detail. So if you suspect it's one of those, certainly go to that extra video and just read up and get a little bit more information about that topic. But I've designed this video really to just show the possibilities of what can be causing increased fuel consumption. The other thing really is the obvious things that you as a driver should be noticing or keeping on top of yourself anyway. So we'll just start off with those really obvious things. Your driving habits, your driving style. Are you driving more aggressively? Have you switched from urban driving to highway driving or vice versa? Has that affected the fuel economy? So sometimes changes in fuel consumption are just down to the way you drive the car. It's down to the driver. That's an obvious. We won't go too much into that. Another common thing, and in some cases it's lost me about 5% of my fuel economy, having underinflated tyres. So keep an eye on those tyre pressures. If the pressure in the tyres is too low, you're going to have lots more friction to overcome, and that's going to have a big bearing on your fuel economy. It depends a lot on your driving style and whether you do those high-speed journeys and lots of short distant drives through town. But the first thing I would check really is the tyre pressures. If one tyre is abnormally low, you may well have a puncture. So getting that addressed can save you the cost of replacing the tyre entirely if you catch it early enough, if it's a repairable puncture. And it can certainly save you wasting all that money on excessive fuel costs. So another thing that really costs your fuel economy is just carrying excess weight. Have you got lots of tools in the back of the car? Are you carrying a lot more unnecessary junk around with you as you're driving? That is going to have a big impact on the fuel economy of your car. And have you added a roof rack or roof bars to your car? Are you driving with an open window? Has something affected the aerodynamics of the car? That extra drag can dramatically increase the amount of fuel that your car is needing to use. So let's now move on to the focus of this video, the mechanical problems that will affect fuel consumption. The first thing you should always do is just download the error codes through the diagnostic port. So get yourself an error code reader, a diagnostic port reader, an OBD2 port reader. Most of them now will connect to your mobile phone. They're relatively cheap devices, but they can go a long way to identifying where the problem is in your car. The high fuel consumption is just a symptom of a potential problem somewhere else. So the wheels attach to the hubs. You've got bearings that carry the weight of the car, CV joints that take the power and spit that power out to the wheels. If those components are worn, there's going to be increased friction. It's going to be wasting a lot of the energy that your engine is creating to overcome that friction. So you'll notice these things getting very hot. You'll probably notice that the bearing is starting to make a noise, a whining noise or a droning sound. And that can usually be the source of your increased fuel consumption. So the combination of higher fuel consumption and that droning noise or the extra heat in the wheel as you're driving along, that's really the first thing you should check if all those things line up. So a hanging brake caliper, so as the brakes press on the rotors or the discs, then create friction. If they're sticking slightly, that again is going to increase friction. So you might notice the car not pulling away as easily as it was. Maybe they're just sticking a little bit intermittently. Maybe they're just sticking on one side or dragging slightly. Again, you'll notice a lot of extra heat building up within the wheel itself, particularly the brake disc. And if you notice that those brakes are starting to overheat or becoming less and less effective, that could well be the source of your increased fuel consumption. So a lot of things inside the engine are reliant on the sensors. So the air sensors the oxygen sensor in the exhaust, anything really that has to do with the dosing of fuel and matching the fuel to the air going into the engine and regulating from the exhaust gases the trim that is required to keep things running efficiently. If those sensors are not working correctly, you'll be dumping excess fuel in. The engine won't be running smoothly. You may have a lumpy tick over, a lumpy idle, loss of power while accelerating. All these things are often symptoms of those failing sensors. So if the engine is not running at the correct temperature, if it's running too cool or too hot, that can affect the efficiency of the engine, and that can result in excess fuel consumption. So that can often be down to the thermostat. So you would typically notice the temperature gauge on the car not moving erratically, or suddenly jumping up, suddenly jumping down, or never really quite getting up to temperature. So they can all be indicators of a problem within the cooling system of the car, and that will be costing you some fuel consumption. So the PCV, the positive crankcase ventilation valve, that takes the excess pressure within the crankcase and dumps that safely into the intake. There's a big debate over what you can do to mitigate the problems of the oil vapours building up on the intake. But if that's blocked and not working, you've got excessive pressure in the crankcase. Now, if the pistons are moving up and down in excessive pressure, that's a lot like wading through deep water. It's very, very hard going. So you're increasing the load on the engine, the work the engine has to do. So you'll be getting less power out of the fuel that you're burning. So PCV issues often go hand in hand with oil leaks, because the pressure buildup is forcing the oil out of parts of the engine where it would normally be contained. You may also notice that the engine is starting to burn oil a little bit. There's a little bit of smoke in the exhaust. So I've done a more detailed video on the PCV valve, what it is, how it works, and that should help you to diagnose a potential problem with a PCV valve. The EGR valve takes some of the exhaust gases, dumping that into the intake. Now, there's a big debate as to whether we actually need that. It's there for environmental purposes. It does reduce fuel consumption in most cases when the engine is warming up and at low RPMs, gentle driving conditions. So if that EGR system is not working, if it's blocked up, if the carbon buildup has stopped the flow or restricted the flow, it's not going to be working as effectively, and that can be a cause for increased fuel consumption. You may well start getting error lights flashing up on the dashboard. So the air filter itself is responsible for filtering all the air that goes into the engine. If that is clogged, if that's blocked up, the car itself is not going to be able to breathe effectively, and that's going to affect the way the engine runs. Effectively, you can reduce the capacity of the engine. Its efficiency is dramatically down on what it was designed to. And as a result of that decreased efficiency, it's going to be using more fuel relative to the amount of air that goes in. But you will notice a big loss of power as well, along with that increased fuel consumption. The fuel injectors spray a mist of fuel into the engine. There's various different types out there, whether you've got a diesel engine and whether your car has direct injection or port injection or indirect pre-cylinder injection. These all require a very, very specific spray pattern to allow the fuel to atomize correctly. So if the fuel's just squirting in as a jet and it's collecting at the bottom of the piston, say, it's not going to burn as effectively. So you're going to be using more fuel relative to what you actually need, just because it's not atomizing correctly, it's not mixing correctly. The engine is not able to get that fuel to burn effectively, and you're going to be down on your fuel consumption. So running a decent injector cleaner through, it's a relatively cheap thing to do, and it's a good first port of call if you suspect you've got injector problems on your car. Again, I've done other videos that go into injectors and fuel systems and fuel system cleaners. So engine misfires, these often affect just one cylinder, so coil packs, spark plugs, the fuel supply to that one cylinder. Anything that's causing the engine to run in an imbalanced way can affect the overall efficiency of the engine and result in you using a lot more fuel. If the injector spray pattern is different in one specific cylinder, again, that'll affect the smooth running of the engine. And the engine management system will try to smooth things out as best it can. It will try to resist knock and detonation. There's a lot of things going on inside the engine. So the car is going to do its best to run as smoothly as it can. but you are probably going to notice that it's using more fuel in order to achieve that. So the exhaust system, leaks in the exhaust system, anything that affects the fast flow of exhaust gases and prevents that scavenging effect from taking place within the cylinders, can reduce the efficiency of the engine and increase your fuel consumption. So the catalysts, the diesel particulate filters, and a lot of modern gasoline petrol engines now come with particulate filters as well. So if these filters get blocked up or clogged, that is going to reduce the flow of exhaust gases. Also, leaks within the exhaust system may upset the flow of the exhaust gases, upset the velocity of those exhaust gases, and that will reduce the scavenging effect. So basically, on the next compression stroke, there's still going to be some exhaust left inside the piston, and that's not going to burn as effectively. That's going to reduce the efficiency and effectiveness of your engine. And wheel alignment, if your wheels are pointing in the wrong direction, it's usually very, very barely noticeably, but if they are not truly lined up, the car is going to be creating a lot of extra friction, and you're going to be down on power. The handling is going to be affected, and you're going to notice that as increased fuel consumption. So getting the wheels properly aligned. Now, it's not just the straight alignment, it's the alignment while cornering. So it's not just the case of going around the car and checking that all the wheels are perfectly lined up. You need really to check the steering dynamically and just make sure that everything is lining up. Again, you may notice excessive heat building up in the tyres if the alignment is not correct. You'll notice that the handling is maybe not what the car was originally. And this can often be down to just worn suspension components. So it's quite difficult to diagnose sometimes the cause of wheel alignment if it's not just something that can be easily adjusted out with the suspension settings being adjusted. So there you have it. There are all the reasons that your car can be using more fuel than usual. So this video hopefully has helped you to go straight to where that problem is most. So please boot that like button if this video has been helpful to you. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We'd love you to stay tuned. And I've lined this video up for you that you should find really interesting. Thanks for watching, and see you in this next video.